This is a story of a Filipino girl who fulfills her promise to her late mother in finding her past. Eventually, upon seeking her roots, she unexpectedly found her destiny that leads to a beautiful love between two souls from different worlds. Chapter 1: The Promise. I could still hear Mama's voice that morning, soft but steady, like the waves hitting the shore outside our small home in Batangas. "Louisa," she said, her frail hand resting on mine, "if you ever have the chance, find your grandfather. Tell him I never stopped thinking of him." That was 5 years ago. And today, I was finally keeping that promise. The airport smelled of coffee and uncertainty. My luggage, one big suitcase filled with clothes, a few photos, and a small wooden rosary, felt heavier than it should. Maybe because it carried everything I was leaving behind: my family, my friends, and the life I had always known. Italy. Even the words sounded like a dream. Or maybe a test. The long flight from Manila to Milan was quiet except for the hum of engines and the occasional crying baby. I stared at the clouds outside the window and imagined Mama sitting beside me, smiling as she once did when she talked about Italy, about my grandfather, Pablo, the man she never got to see again after leaving as a child with my grandmother. When the plane landed, the cold air of Milan greeted me like a stranger. I wrapped my thin jacket tighter around me, whispering, "Kaya ko too." I have to believe that. I didn't come all this way to give up now. Finding someone in a foreign country with only a few old letters and a faded photo was foolish. That's what my aunt back home said. Maybe it was. But promises, especially to your mother, are not meant to be broken. My first few days were hard. The small hostel I could afford was shared with other workers, some from the Philippines, others from Nigeria and Peru. We all had the same story, chasing a dream or an answer, far from home. I tried going to local offices, churches, even asking old people in small cafes if they had heard of a Pablo de la Cruz, who once lived near San Remo decades ago. Most just shrugged or said, "Me despias," with kind but puzzled eyes. Every night I'd pray, holding Mama's rosary, and remind myself, "One step at a time, Louisa." Then, one afternoon, as I sat in a small park counting the last euros in my wallet, I heard a familiar voice. "Louisa?" I turned, and there she was. Maggie. My friend from high school, now with shorter hair, warm eyes, and an accent that mixed Tagalog and Italian. Maggie. Oh my goodness. I ran to hug her, and for the first time since arriving, I felt like I wasn't completely lost. She laughed. "You look tired, girl. When did you get here?" 3 weeks ago. I'm still trying to find my grandfather. But it's harder than I thought. My savings are almost gone. Maggie's face softened. That's tough. But hey, maybe I can help. The lady I clean for told me a big house in Milan is looking for someone. A cleaner, part-time. The owner lives in Rome, so it's mostly empty. You'll have food and a room there. It's honest work. A house in Milan. Food. Shelter. My heart lifted a little. "When can I start?" I asked. Maggie smiled. "Tomorrow. I'll bring you there." The caretaker said they're expecting someone. That night, as I packed my few things, I whispered another prayer, this time not just for strength, but for gratitude. I didn't know what waited for me in that big house or who the owner was. But deep inside, something told me that maybe, just maybe, this was where my story would truly begin. Chapter 2: The House on Via della Quiet. Maggie wasn't kidding when she said the house was big. By the time we reached the tall black gates of Via della Quiet, I felt like I had stepped into another world. Rows of maple trees guarded the driveway, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The house, no, the mansion, sat proudly at the end, its stone walls bathed in the soft morning sun. I had never seen a house so quiet. So still. It almost looked like time itself had stopped here. Maggie squeezed my arm. "See that window on the top floor? That's the library. You'll like it there, smells like old books and polished wood." I smiled nervously. "You've been inside?" She nodded. "A few times when I helped with the cleaning. But now they need someone full-time. You'll mostly have the house to yourself." The owner, Senior Carlos Bianchi, lives and works in Rome. He only comes home during weekends, if ever. You probably won't even meet him. The name sounded familiar, Carlos Bianchi. Where had I heard it? Oh yes. He was mentioned in the newspaper Maggie once showed me, a young CEO of a tech company, one of Italy's rising business figures. I tried not to show my surprise. He owns this place? Yes, Maggie said, grinning. But don't worry. He's barely around. You'll just clean, cook a little, water the plants. There's even a housekeeper who comes twice a week to check supplies. It's a good deal. It really was. For the first time since I arrived in Italy, I felt hope stirring again. Inside, the house was even more beautiful. Marble floors, high ceilings, and large windows that opened to a garden bursting with roses and lavender. But what struck me most was how everything seemed cared for, not in a cold, museum-like way, but lovingly maintained. The faint scent of cedar and lemon oil lingered in the air. This place, I whispered. It's like a storybook. Maggie smiled. Then live your story well, Louisa. She helped me settle in my small but cozy room near the back of the mansion. A single bed, a wooden desk, and a window overlooking the garden, it was more than enough. Before leaving, Maggie handed me a folded paper. Here's the caretaker's number and some instructions. And Louisa, she added, holding my gaze, this job could be a blessing. Take care of it. You never know what God is preparing for you. Her words stayed with me long after she left. That afternoon, I started cleaning. I dusted, polished, and mopped, humming old Filipino love songs to keep myself company. The echo of my own voice comforted me. It made the house feel less empty. In the living room, I found several framed photos, city skylines, an elderly couple smiling under grapevines, and one of a young man in a tailored suit, his dark eyes focused and confident. There was no mistaking it, Carlos Bianchi. I studied his face for a moment. He looked like the kind of man who had everything figured out: success, wealth, purpose. The opposite of me. As the day ended, I prepared a simple dinner, pasta with garlic and olive oil. It felt strange cooking for someone who wasn't there. But somehow, I wanted the house to feel alive when he returned, even just for a moment. Before I went to bed, I placed a small note on the dining table. Buonasera, Signor Bianchi. I'm Louisa, your new cleaner and house sitter. Thank you for the opportunity. I prepared a simple dinner in case you visit this weekend. Grazie mille. Louisa. I didn't expect a reply, but writing that note made me feel seen, like I was part of something again. As I lay in bed, the silence of the house wrapped around me like a blanket. Somewhere outside, the wind brushed through the trees. I closed my eyes and whispered, Lord, thank you for today. I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I trust you know the way. And for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without worry. Chapter 3: Letters to an Absent Man. The days in the mansion settled into a rhythm, almost like a song I was learning to hum by heart. Mornings began with the soft sound of birds outside my window, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen, and the golden light spilling across the marble floors. Every day I cleaned, cooked simple meals, watered the plants, and made sure everything felt alive. Even if I was the only one there. There was peace in the silence, but also a certain kind of loneliness that crept in at night. I often found myself talking to the walls, as if the house itself could hear me. Maybe it did. Maybe it had missed having a voice inside it. By the end of the first week, I'd already written 3 small notes to Senior Carlos Bianchi. I didn't know why, no one told me to, but it felt natural somehow. The first one was just a thank you note for the job. The second was to let him know that the garden sprinklers weren't working properly, and I'd called a technician. The third was a bit more personal. Buongiorno, Signor Bianchi. I hope your work in Rome is going well. I made lasagna today. The recipe reminds me of my mother's cooking. There's enough in the fridge if you ever come home this weekend. Take care. Louisa. I placed that note beside a small tray of baked lasagna and didn't think much of it. But when I came back to work on Monday, I noticed something that made me stop. The tray was empty. And beside it, on the counter, was a folded napkin with 2 words written in neat, careful handwriting. Grazie, Louisa. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, smiling without realizing it. It was the first sign that I wasn't alone after all. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, smiling without realizing it. It was the first sign that I wasn't alone after all. The next week went by quickly. I found comfort in the little things: the warmth of sunlight in the kitchen, the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock, the laughter of children playing in the nearby street. Each day, I'd leave a note for Carlos, sometimes about the house, sometimes about the weather, and sometimes about things that didn't matter much at all. But they mattered to me. I fixed the faucet today. The leak was small, but it made a big mess. I'm learning that some problems look big until you find where they truly start. Funny how life works like that. The roses in the garden are blooming again. I trimmed the wilted ones. They reminded me that even beautiful things need pruning to grow. I didn't expect him to read them, but I hoped he did. Sometimes I imagined him, a busy man in his 30s, sitting in his office in Rome, tired from meetings, finding my little handwritten note on his kitchen counter and smiling, just for a second. I didn't know what he looked like beyond the photo in the hallway, but I felt like I was slowly getting to know him, one letter at a time. One evening, after finishing my chores, I sat in the library. The smell of old books and dust comforted me. I found an old Italian poetry book and tried to read aloud, struggling through the words. Il cuore trova casa, the heart finds home. Something about that line stayed with me. I took my journal and wrote. Maybe that's what I'm doing here. Not just looking for my grandfather, but for home. I didn't know that on that same weekend, in Rome, Carlos Bianchi was holding one of my letters in his hands, rereading it, smiling faintly, and wondering what kind of woman wrote such gentle words. And though we were hundreds of miles apart, the silence between us began to speak. Chapter 4: Echoes and Empty Streets. The city of Milan had begun to feel less like a maze and more like a living, breathing story, one that I was slowly learning to read. Every Saturday morning, after finishing my chores in the mansion, I'd take the early train into the city center. My goal was always the same: to find him, my grandfather, Pablo della Cruz. I carried with me the same faded photograph Mama had given me, a young man with warm brown eyes standing beside an Italian woman in front of a small seaside house. On the back, Mama had written in careful handwriting, "Papa, San Remo, 1978. That was all I had. I went to parish offices, to archives, to local government buildings, even to Filipino communities in the city. Every place gave me the same polite but regretful answer: no record, no clue. Each time I walked back through the crowded streets, I felt smaller. By the third weekend, my savings had thinned to almost nothing. I calculated my remaining euros and sighed. Maybe it was time to stop searching, just for a while. But how do you stop searching for a promise? That evening, I returned to the mansion, exhausted but grateful to have a roof over my head. The quiet of the house felt like a friend waiting for me. In the kitchen, I found another small surprise: a note on the counter, written in the same neat handwriting as before. The lasagna was delicious. You have a gift. Thank you for taking care of the house. C.B. My heart skipped. He had written again. I smiled and whispered, "You're welcome, Signor Bianchi," as if he were right there beside me. That night, before going to bed, I wrote another note and left it on the counter. I'm glad you liked the lasagna. I enjoy keeping this house warm and cared for. It feels like a home, even when it's quiet. I hope your work isn't too tiring. Louisa. As I slipped the note under a small vase, I realized that somehow these tiny exchanges had become the most human part of my week. I didn't know his voice, or how he moved, or what kind of smile he had, but his words on paper made the distance between us feel smaller. Meanwhile, in Rome, Carlos Bianchi sat in his sleek, glass-walled office late at night, his eyes drifting from his laptop to a small folded piece of paper beside his coffee mug. Louisa's handwriting was simple, graceful, her words genuine in a way that caught him off guard. He had grown used to a world of formal emails and polite conversations filled with empty praise. But her letters were different, honest, unpretentious, warm. He found himself thinking about the woman who cleaned his house, who wrote notes about leaky faucets, blooming roses, and prayers whispered before bed. And somehow, he couldn't bring himself to throw any of them away. He kept each note folded neatly in a drawer of his desk, as though they were small treasures he didn't quite understand yet. By the end of the third week, I began to feel something stir inside me, a restlessness I couldn't explain. I wanted to meet him. Not because of curiosity, but because I wanted to thank him in person for unknowingly keeping me grounded. But life had other plans. The next morning, I received a call from Maggie. Her voice trembled. "Louisa, I just lost one of my jobs. The lady's family is cutting expenses. I know it's not your fault, but times are getting hard here." I felt a pinch of guilt. "I'm sorry, Maggie. I wish I could help." She sighed. "Don't worry, girl. We'll survive, we always do. But promise me something, okay? Don't give up looking for your grandfather. Your mama would be proud of you." Her words touched me deeply. That night, I sat by my window, the wind brushing through the curtains. I looked at the stars, the same stars I used to watch with Mama, and whispered, "Please, help me find him." Something inside me still believed that I would. I just didn't know yet that the key to finding my grandfather's past was already hidden inside the very house I was cleaning every day. Chapter 5: The Library Door. The next morning was crisp and bright, the kind of morning that smelled like fresh beginnings. I opened the windows to let the light in, humming softly as I dusted the shelves in the grand hallway. Sunbeams spilled through the glass like golden ribbons, brushing against the old paintings that lined the walls. Every room in that mansion had its own soul. The kitchen was warm and lived in. The garden was peaceful, like a secret waiting to be told. But the library was different. It felt sacred. The first time I opened its heavy wooden door, I was met with the scent of old paper and cedar. Tall shelves stretched to the ceiling, filled with books of every color and age. Some looked untouched for years, others still had bookmarks tucked between their pages. In the center of the room stood a large desk, neat and elegant, with a globe beside it and a small framed photo, a black and white picture of a young man beside an older gentleman, both smiling. I assumed one was Carlos and the other his father or grandfather. Cleaning that room became my favorite part of the day. I felt safe there, surrounded by stories, even if they weren't mine. That Thursday afternoon, while I was dusting the top shelf, a thin leather folder slipped from between two large books and landed on the floor with a soft thud. I knelt to pick it up. The cover had no label, just the initials CB embossed in gold. I shouldn't have opened it. But curiosity, or maybe fate, made me. Inside were several old photographs. Some of the same man from the framed picture, and one that made my breath catch in my throat. In that photograph, 3 young men stood together in front of what looked like a seaside villa. One of them was the same man from my mother's faded photo, the man I had been searching for. My grandfather, Pablo de la Cruz. I knew his face instantly, those familiar brown eyes, that shy smile. And beside him stood a woman I recognized from Mama's stories, my grandmother, Matilda, holding a baby in her arms. But it was the third man who drew my attention. He stood slightly apart, tall and handsome, with the same strong jawline I'd seen in Carlos's picture. Could it be his grandfather? My heart began to race. What were the chances? How could my grandfather and the Bianchi family have known each other? I stared at the picture, trembling. This house, the place I had been cleaning, sleeping in, praying in, might be connected to the very family my mother had longed to find. For a long moment, I sat on the library floor, the weight of the discovery pressing on my chest. I wanted to call Maggie, to tell her, but my thoughts were too tangled. There was only one person who could give me answers now. Carlos Bianchi. I wrote a note that evening, longer than usual, my handwriting shaking slightly. Dear Senior Bianchi. While cleaning the library today, I came across a photograph, 3 men and a woman by the sea. One of them looks very much like my grandfather, Pablo de la Cruz. I apologize if I've overstepped by mentioning this, but if you know anything about the people in that picture, I would be deeply grateful. I'll wait until you return this weekend, if you don't mind me asking in person. With respect, Louisa. For the first time, I didn't leave the mansion that Friday evening. I packed my things slowly, made dinner, and sat on the couch, heart pounding, waiting for a man I had never met, but whose life was somehow woven into my family's past. By midnight, the lights of a car swept across the front windows. I froze. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor. Then a tall figure entered the room, tired, dressed in a dark coat, his eyes scanning the place until they landed on me. I stood, unsure what to say. "Signor Bianchi?" I whispered. He nodded slowly, his expression softening as if he already knew who I was. "You must be Louisa." His voice was warm, low, calm, but curious. And at that moment, standing there in the quiet of the mansion, with the photograph still folded in my trembling hand, I knew that nothing in my life would ever be the same again. Chapter 6: The Man Behind the Name. I must have looked like a ghost standing in the middle of the living room, still holding the photo like it was the last piece of something fragile. Carlos Bianchi, flesh and blood, was taller than I imagined. His dark hair was slightly tousled from travel, and fatigue lingered beneath his sharp, intelligent eyes. But there was something kind in them, something unexpectedly gentle. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. He was the first to break the silence. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, setting down his coat. His Italian accent wrapped around each word softly. "Maggie told me you're the new caretaker. You must be Louisa." "Yes," I managed, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry for waiting here, Signor Bianchi. I wanted to speak with you about something important." He glanced at the photo in my hand. "Something you found?" I nodded and stepped closer, my pulse quickening. "In the library. This photograph, it shows my grandfather." He frowned slightly, curiosity replacing fatigue. I handed him the photo. He took it carefully, studying it beneath the warm light. After a long pause, he looked up. "You're sure?" "Yes," I said. His name was Pablo de la Cruz. He came from the Philippines and worked in Italy many years ago. "That's him, with my grandmother and my mother when she was a baby." Carlos's eyes softened with recognition. "My grandfather used to talk about a friend named Pablo. He said they met in San Remo when they were both young, worked on restoring boats together near the coast. He always spoke fondly of him." The air seemed to thicken with the weight of our shared discovery. "So they were friends?" I whispered. He nodded slowly. "Close ones, from what I know. My grandfather once said Pablo left suddenly, went back to the Philippines after his wife and daughter disappeared. He always wondered what happened to him." My throat tightened. My grandmother left because her visa expired, and she couldn't bring my grandfather along. She thought she'd return one day, but she never did. My mother grew up without him, and she asked me to find him. Carlos listened in silence, his gaze steady and sincere. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That must have been difficult for both of you." I smiled faintly, though tears were already blurring my vision. "She passed away 5 years ago. Finding him was her last wish." He looked down at the photo again, then back at me. "Louisa, I think I can help you." Those words felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "There are old records in my grandfather's estate in San Remo," he continued. "Letters, photographs, things that might tell us where Pablo went after they lost touch. If you'd like, I can take you there." I could barely breathe. "Truly?" He nodded. "Yes. I'll call my uncle. He still manages the property. Maybe he knows more." A small silence passed between us, soft and warm. This man, who until now had been nothing but a name on my pay slip and a few lines of handwriting, had suddenly become the bridge between my past and the truth I'd spent years searching for. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "You don't know what this means to me." He smiled faintly. "I might have an idea." It wasn't the smile of a powerful CEO, but of someone human, someone who understood what it meant to lose and long. After a moment, he glanced toward the kitchen. "You must be tired. Did you have dinner?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Then let's fix that." He smiled again, almost boyishly. "You cook, don't you?" "I've tasted your lasagna." I laughed softly. "You did leave me a note." He grinned. "You started it." We both laughed, and for the first time, the mansion no longer felt cold. As we prepared a simple meal together, I caught myself watching him, how he moved with quiet confidence, how he listened when I spoke, how he smiled like he hadn't done so in a long time. Something gentle and unspoken hung in the air, something I didn't dare name. Later, when I finally went to bed, I lay awake replaying the evening over and over, the warmth in his voice, the kindness in his eyes, and the photograph that had somehow tied our two worlds together. And somewhere deep in my heart, I knew my search wasn't only about finding my grandfather anymore. It had become about something else. Something beginning. Chapter 7. The Road to San Remo. The morning air was cool and silver, the sky brushed with soft clouds when Carlos and I set out for San Remo. I hadn't slept much the night before. Excitement and fear wrestled inside me, each hour slower than the last. When his car pulled into the driveway, I could hardly believe that this was really happening, that he, my employer, this calm and quietly magnetic man, was personally driving me to find my grandfather's past. "Ready?" he asked, holding open the passenger door. "As I'll ever be," I said, clutching the photo like a compass. He smiled faintly. "It's about a 3-hour drive. You can rest if you'd like." Rest? Impossible. My mind was too full of Mama's stories, of the letters I'd never read, of the picture that had somehow led me here. We left the city behind, trading Milan's noise for the quiet rhythm of the countryside. Golden fields rolled past us, dotted with olive trees and clusters of white houses perched on gentle hills. The roads curved like ribbons through vineyards, and every turn seemed to hum with memory. For a while, we drove in silence, comfortable and unforced. The radio played soft Italian music, the kind that carried a little ache, like nostalgia you couldn't name. "Do you come here often?" I asked, breaking the stillness. "San Remo." He shook his head. "Not much anymore. My grandfather's house is still there, but after he passed, I rarely visited. Life happened. Work." He chuckled. "Mostly. It's strange, you build a life so busy that you forget to live it." I turned to him. "Then maybe today is a reminder." He glanced at me, eyes warm. "Maybe it is." We stopped at a small cafe by the coast for lunch. The sea stretched wide before us, calm and blue, like a promise. I could taste the salt in the wind as we sat outside, sipping espresso. Carlos watched the waves thoughtfully. "My grandfather used to bring me here," he said. He told me stories about a man from the Philippines who taught him how to fix a broken boat using nothing but patience and faith. My heart skipped. That had to be my grandfather. He nodded slowly. He said that man could fix anything except goodbyes. The words hit me like a quiet truth. Maybe that's why Mama always longed to come back. Maybe love never ends, it just waits, like the tide. By mid-afternoon, we reached a small town near the water. The road narrowed into stone paths lined with lemon trees and colorful houses. Carlos turned into a quiet lane and stopped in front of a charming old villa. "This is it," he said. "My grandfather's home." I stepped out, heart pounding. The sea glimmered just beyond the wall, and the air smelled of salt and wildflowers. We were met by a middle-aged man tending to the garden, tanned, gentle-eyed, his hands rough with work. "Mateo," Carlos called. "It's me, Carlos." The man turned, breaking into a surprised smile. "Carlos. Dio mio, you've grown into your grandfather's image." They hugged like old friends. Then Mateo's gaze fell on me. "And who is this lovely young lady?" I stepped forward, nerves fluttering. "My name is Luisa de la Cruz. My parents were never married, so I had always used my mother's last name." The smile on his face froze. "De la Cruz." He blinked, then whispered, "Pablo's granddaughter?" I nodded, my voice trembling. "Yes." "You knew him?" Mateo's eyes softened with emotion. "Knew him? He was like a brother to my father. My God, he spoke of your grandmother and your mother often. Come inside." The villa was filled with sunlight and old photographs. On one wall hung a painting of a beach and 2 children playing by the water, one of them unmistakably my mother as a little girl. Mateo showed us to a small room filled with boxes. He reached for one marked P. de la Cruz and opened it carefully. Inside were letters tied with faded ribbons and a wooden jewelry box with the name Matilda etched into its lid. "He left these," Mateo said softly. Said they were meant for your mother and grandmother, in case they ever found their way back. I touched the letters reverently, tears spilling before I could stop them. Mama never got to see these, I whispered. She died before she could come. Mateo placed a hand on my shoulder. Then maybe it's you who is meant to bring them home. I looked at Carlos, who stood quietly beside me, his gaze kind and steady. Thank you, I said through tears. If you hadn't helped me, I wouldn't be here. He smiled softly. You found this place because you never stopped believing. I just drove the car. But we both knew it wasn't that simple. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, we visited the small cemetery near the cliff where my grandfather rested. I knelt beside his grave, placing the rosary Mama had given me on the stone. Lolo Pablo, I whispered, I came, just like Mama wanted. I'm sorry it's late. The sea answered with a hush of waves against the shore, and somehow I felt peace, like he was listening. Later, as Carlos and I walked back toward the villa, he said quietly, I think he'd be proud of you, Luisa. I looked up at him, smiling through the tears. And maybe your grandfather too. They kept their friendship alive, through us. He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said everything. That night, as the moon rose over San Remo, I realized that what had begun as a search for my grandfather was slowly turning into something even more powerful, the beginning of love, wrapped in gratitude, faith, and second chances. Chapter 8, Letters from the Sea. The morning after meeting Mateo felt different, lighter somehow, even though my heart still carried the weight of what I'd learned. For the first time since I arrived in Italy, I woke up not with uncertainty, but with a strange sense of belonging. I could hear the waves from the window of the small guest room Mateo had prepared for me. The air smelled faintly of salt and lemon. Somewhere downstairs, Carlos and Mateo were talking over coffee. I stayed in bed a moment longer, listening to the peaceful rhythm of their voices blending with the sea breeze. On the desk beside me sat the box of letters from my grandfather, Lolo Pablo. I hadn't opened them yet. Part of me was scared of what they might say, or what I might feel reading them. But Mama's voice echoed in my mind, when you seek the truth, Anik, you must be brave enough to face it. I untied the faded ribbon. The paper was yellowed with age, but the handwriting was neat and steady. The first letter was addressed to Matilda, my grandmother. My dearest Matilda, the sea has been quiet today, though my heart has not. I still see your face in the waves, hear your laughter in the wind. I know you've gone far, and maybe it is my fault that you had to. But if ever our daughter asks about me, tell her that I loved her even from across oceans. Tell her that she was my light in the long nights I spent alone by this shore. Pablo. By the time I finished reading, my tears were falling silently onto the paper. I had imagined my grandfather so many times, stern, proud, mysterious, but not like this. Not a man aching with love he could never give. Carlos knocked gently on the door. Luisa? I quickly wiped my eyes. Come in. He stepped inside, holding 2 cups of coffee. Mateo went to town to buy something. I thought you could use this. Thank you, I whispered, taking the cup. I was just reading one of Lolo's letters. He sat beside me on the small couch, his gaze soft. Do you want to talk about it? I smiled faintly. He loved deeply. But I think he carried too much pride. Maybe that's why they never found their way back to each other. Carlos nodded. Sometimes love isn't about finding the way back. It's about leaving enough light for someone else to follow. His words settled in my chest like warmth. I looked at him, really looked at him, the quiet strength in his eyes, the kindness in the way he always gave space without asking for anything in return. You sound like you've been lost before, I said softly. He smiled, a little wistful. Haven't we all? Later that afternoon, Mateo invited us to lunch by the shore. He cooked seafood pasta, and we ate under a small awning while the waves brushed the sand. He sat beside me on the small couch, his gaze soft. Do you want to talk about it? I smiled faintly. He loved deeply. But I think he carried too much pride. Maybe that's why they never found their way back to each other. Carlos nodded. Sometimes love isn't about finding the way back. It's about leaving enough light for someone else to follow. His words settled in my chest like warmth. I looked at him, really looked at him, the quiet strength in his eyes, the kindness in the way he always gave space without asking for anything in return. "You sound like you've been lost before," I said softly. He smiled, a little wistful. "Haven't we all?" Later that afternoon, Matteo invited us to lunch by the shore. He cooked seafood pasta, and we ate under a small awning while the waves brushed the sand. Chapter 9: The Last Letter. The drive back to Milan felt quieter than our journey to San Remo. Maybe because I was carrying too many feelings at once: sadness for what I'd lost, gratitude for what I'd found, and something softer, something unnamed, that seemed to bloom whenever Carlos looked my way. I glanced at him as he drove, sunlight flickering across his face. He looked peaceful, but there was a weight in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of being strong for everyone else. "Are you all right?" I asked. He smiled, eyes still on the road. "I was just thinking how fast time passes. Weeks ago, I didn't know a woman named Luisa Dela Cruz existed. And now I can't imagine the house without her letters on the counter." I laughed quietly. "You're just saying that because no one else will bake lasagna for you." "Maybe," he said, grinning. "But I've realized I look forward to those notes more than I'd like to admit." My heart gave a little flutter, like a bird startled by joy. We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the world outside painting itself in the colors of late afternoon, gold and soft rose, fading gently into blue. When we reached the mansion, it felt different to me. It wasn't just a workplace anymore. It had become part of my journey, part of me. I went in my small room and unpacked the few things Matteo had given me: the jewelry box with Matilda etched on it, the bundle of letters, and one sealed envelope with my mother's name written on it. It was dated September 8, 1988. To my daughter, Elena. My breath caught. I sat down on the edge of the bed and carefully opened it. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. "My dearest Elena, if this letter reaches you, it means that God has been kind to your old man's wish. I have lived long enough to understand that love, no matter how lost it seems, always finds its way home. I wanted to see you and your mother again, but perhaps this letter will be my way of holding you close. Tell your mother I never stopped waiting, even when my hair turned white and my hands grew weak. And if she is no longer with you, tell her I am proud of the woman she became. Tell her that her laughter still lives in the waves of San Remo, and in you, her child who was brave enough to seek her roots. Elena, be kind to the world, and let it be kind to you. Love fully, forgive quickly, and when you find someone who makes your heart quiet and certain, do not be afraid. Papa." By the time I reached the last line, my tears had blurred the ink. I pressed the letter to my heart, whispering, "I found you, Lolo. I found you for Mama and Lola, and I think I found something more, too." There was a knock at the door. "Luisa?" Carlos's voice. "Dinner's ready. I cooked this time." I laughed softly, brushing away my tears. "You cook? Don't sound so surprised," he teased from behind the door. "It's edible. I promise." We ate in the garden, under strings of fairy lights that Carlos' housekeeper had hung before. The air smelled faintly of rosemary and summer. He'd made pasta, a bit overcooked, but full of heart. I told him so, and he pretended to be offended. Over dinner, we talked about everything: his childhood summers in San Remo, my first months in Italy, the way both of us had lost people we loved, but somehow kept going. At one point, he looked at me and said quietly, "Do you ever wonder why we meet certain people?" I nodded. "All the time." "Maybe it's not about chance," he said. "Maybe it's about timing, finding someone right when you're ready to stop running from the past." I met his gaze, and in that moment, I didn't see the CEO who lived miles away in Rome. I saw the man who had driven me across the country just so I could say goodbye to a grandfather I'd never met. And suddenly, everything made sense. Maybe love didn't come as lightning or grand gestures. Maybe it came softly, like sunlight through an open window, like the steady sound of waves returning to shore. Later that night, I stood by the window of my small room, holding Lolo's letter once more. The moon hung high, pale and full. "I'll be all right now, Mama," I whispered. "I found what you wanted me to find. And maybe I found who I meant to meet too." From the kitchen below, I heard Carlos humming low, unhurried, content. And for the first time since leaving the Philippines, I felt something that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Home. Chapter 10, where the heart begins to stay. The weeks after our trip to San Remo unfolded like a dream I didn't want to wake from. Each morning in the Bianchi mansion began with sunlight streaming through tall windows and the scent of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. But what changed most wasn't the house, it was the way it felt. Carlos started spending more time in Milan. He said it was to manage a few things at the company headquarters, but I knew better. He'd smile every time he saw me watering the plants or folding linens, and the unspoken understanding between us grew stronger, delicate, but undeniable. Sometimes we'd share breakfast before he left for meetings. Other times, we'd walk through the garden after dinner, the air filled with the chirping of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. He'd tell me stories about Rome, about his grandfather, about how lonely it can be at the top when no one really sees you beyond your title. I listened. And somehow, I think that's what he needed, someone who saw him, not just Senior Bianchi, the CEO. He started teasing me about my little habits, the way I hummed while sweeping, or how I always burned the first batch of cookies. In return, I teased him about how he pretended not to like sweets, but always finished the tiramisu I left in the fridge. But beneath the laughter, there was something else, a warmth I was afraid to name. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to take a walk through the small weekend market in the nearby piazza. The place buzzed with life, children running past, vendors calling out prices, the smell of roasted chestnuts and flowers thick in the air. Carlos bought me a cone of gelato, pistachio-flavored, my favorite. "You remember," I said, surprised. "I pay attention," he replied, his eyes smiling. We sat on a bench near the fountain, watching the sunlight play on the water. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "Louisa, have you thought about what comes next?" I looked at him, unsure. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your plans. You've found your grandfather's family. You've fulfilled your promise to your mother. Will you go back to the Philippines soon?" His question hung in the air between us. I'd thought about it, of course. My work visa would expire in a few months. Maggie had already asked when I'd return. But every time I imagined leaving Italy, something inside me hesitated. "I don't know," I admitted. "A part of me wants to go home. But another part feels like I've just started to find myself here." He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. Sometimes the heart finds home in unexpected places. I met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, everything else, the market noise, the chatter, the world, faded away. That evening, I found a small bouquet of tulips on the kitchen counter with a note in his familiar handwriting. "Thank you for bringing life back into this house. You remind me what kindness feels like." See. I pressed the note to my chest, smiling. It was the kind of message you read twice, once with your eyes and again with your heart. But as days passed, I began to feel the pull of two worlds. The Philippines was home, Mama's grave, my friends, everything I'd grown up with. Yet here in Italy, I'd built something new, a life I never expected, and a love that felt like a quiet sunrise, gentle but real. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in the library surrounded by the soft glow of the lamps and whisper, "Mama, what would you do?" The silence never answered, but I could almost feel her smile, that same tender smile that always meant, "Follow where love leads, Anik." One evening, as we closed the windows against the night breeze, Carlos looked at me and said, "Louisa, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you stopped being just my housekeeper." My heart thudded. "What do you mean?" He smiled, but his voice was soft. "I mean you're more than that. To this house. To me." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. His eyes held mine steady, sincere, full of something that felt like truth. But before either of us could say more, his phone rang, pulling him back into the world of business and deadlines. And just like that, the moment passed. Still, the echo of his words lingered long after he'd left the room. That night, I opened Lolo Pablo's last letter again and traced the line that read, "When you find someone who makes your heart quiet and certain, do not be afraid." That message was meant for my mother, but it is as if now meant for me. I wasn't certain of anything yet, but my heart was, for the first time, truly quiet. Chapter 11. The Days That Grew Too Quiet. The days turned colder as autumn began to settle over Milan. The garden that once bloomed with summer colors now shimmered with gold and rust, and each morning I could see my breath fog in the air as I opened the windows. Something about the season made everything feel fragile, beautiful, but fleeting. Carlos had been busier than usual. His company was expanding, and he often had to travel back and forth to Rome for meetings. I'd gotten used to his presence, the sound of his laughter in the kitchen, his quiet humming as he read the paper, and now, without it, the mansion felt hollow again. I still worked as before, cleaning, cooking, taking care of the house, but my hands moved slower, my thoughts elsewhere. Every night before I went to bed, I looked at the small bouquet of dried tulips he'd once given me. The colors had faded, but they still carried a memory that warmed me when the house grew too silent. One morning, as I was ironing linens in the laundry room, I got an email from the employment agency. Dear Ms. Dela Cruz, please be reminded that your work visa is set to expire in 6 weeks. Kindly contact our office regarding renewal options or return arrangements. I froze. 6 weeks. I sat down on the small stool, the iron still steaming on the board. My mind spun. Renewal would be difficult without a permanent employer sponsor. Maggie had once told me it could take months I didn't have. That afternoon, I went to the garden and watched the leaves fall. It was strange how life could be so quiet when your heart was screaming inside. When Carlos returned that weekend, I decided to tell him. He found me in the kitchen, stirring soup. You're quiet today, he said, setting his briefcase down. I received an email, I said softly. From the agency. He looked at me, concern flickering in his eyes. Is something wrong? My visa, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's expiring soon. 6 weeks. He fell silent, his jaw tightening slightly. I see, he said finally. And what will you do? I gave a small, uncertain smile. I'll probably go back to the Philippines. I've saved enough to start something small. Maybe open a cafe near our old town. That's wonderful, he said, but his voice carried an edge of something else. Regret, maybe. Or sadness. For a while, we just stood there, the only sound between us the gentle simmer of the soup. Then, quietly, he said, I'll miss you, Louisa. The words struck deeper than I expected. I turned to him and said softly, I'll miss this place. And you. More than I thought I would. His eyes met mine intense, searching, and for a heartbeat, I thought he might say something more. But instead, he stepped back, as if fighting a war inside himself. I have to make a call, he murmured, and left the room. When the door closed behind him, the house felt emptier than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my window, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights shimmer in the distance. How could something that started as a simple job turn into a story I didn't want to end? I thought of Mama, how she used to tell me that love doesn't always ask permission to enter your life. Sometimes, it simply arrives, changes everything, and then asks you to be brave enough to hold on or let go. But I didn't know which one I was ready to do. The next morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter written in Carlos's familiar handwriting. Louisa, I'll be in Rome for a few days, maybe a week. Please take care of the house. And yourself. P.S. There's something I'd like to talk to you about when I return. C. Something to talk about. I stared at the words, my heart beating too fast. Was it about the visa? Or was it about us? Either way, all I could do was wait. And sometimes, waiting is its own kind of heartbreak. That week stretched longer than any other. I wrote in my journal, baked bread, cleaned every room twice, anything to fill the silence. But every time I walked past the garden, I imagined his voice, his footsteps, his laughter. And every night, I whispered to myself the words I couldn't say to him out loud. Please don't let this be the end. Chapter 12. When he came back. Carlos returned on a Friday night, the same day of the week we'd first met months ago, when I'd been asleep on the couch and he'd found me there. It almost felt like a circle closing. I was in the kitchen when I heard the familiar sound of his car pulling into the driveway. My heart began to race before I could even think. I told myself to stay calm, to act normal, as if my entire world hadn't been waiting for that sound for days. When the front door opened, he called softly, Louisa. I'm here, I said, wiping my hands on a towel. He stepped into the kitchen, looking tired but handsome in a way that made my breath catch. His hair was a little messy, his shirt slightly wrinkled, but his eyes, they looked softer, warmer. "You look different," he said, his gaze lingering. "Maybe it's the light." I laughed lightly, though my heart wasn't steady. "You're just not used to seeing me in my cooking apron." He smiled, that quiet, boyish smile that always felt like sunshine breaking through a cloudy day. We ate dinner together. He brought home a bottle of wine from Rome, and though I rarely drank, I took a small glass. The warmth of it spread through me, softening the ache that had been building for days. For a while, we just talked about the garden, the weather, Maggie's latest messages from Florence. Nothing important, but somehow everything felt important. Because every word was another moment closer to what I knew was coming. Finally, he set his glass down and said, "Louisa, about your visa." My stomach nodded. "Yes. I spoke with my legal team in Rome," he said carefully. "I wanted to see if there was a way to extend it." I blinked, startled. "You did that for me?" He nodded. "I didn't want you to leave without at least knowing you had a choice." A lump formed in my throat. "That's very kind of you, Carlos, but I don't want to cause any trouble." "It's not trouble," he said firmly. "You've brought peace back into this house." "Into me." He paused then, as if deciding whether to take a step that couldn't be undone. "Louisa," he said softly, "I don't want you to leave." My breath caught. "I thought I was just grateful," he continued, "grateful for your kindness, your letters, your laughter. But somewhere along the way, it became something more. I tried to ignore it, to tell myself it was impossible. But when I went to Rome, every quiet moment reminded me of you." I couldn't move. His words were like gentle waves, carrying everything I'd tried to bury. He took a slow breath. "I know this is sudden, and I don't expect anything from you. But I needed to be honest, because I can't let you go without telling you that I care for you, Louisa. More than I should. More than I planned." I felt tears rise unbidden. For a long moment, the only sound between us was the quiet hum of the clock on the wall. Finally, I whispered, "I didn't plan this either." He looked up, eyes searching mine. "I came here looking for family," I said. "I thought that was all I needed. But somewhere between cleaning your house and writing you notes you didn't have to read, I started caring too. Maybe too much." He exhaled, as if releasing a breath he'd been holding for weeks. We stood there, two people who had built a home out of silence and letters, and the air between us shimmered with everything we hadn't said. Then, slowly, Carlos reached for my hand. His touch was warm, steady, real. "Stay," he said simply. "Stay, Louisa. Not just because of the visa. Stay because this house, my life, is better with you in it." I felt the tears fall before I could stop them. "Carlos." He smiled faintly, brushing a tear from my cheek. "You don't have to answer now. Just know that I meant every word." I nodded, my heart full to the brim. "You already know my answer," I whispered. That night, after he went to his study, I stepped outside into the garden. The wind was cool, and the stars stretched endlessly above. I looked up and whispered, "Mama, I think I've found my place." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor anywhere. I felt home. Chapter 13, The Days We Kept. The days that followed felt like they belonged to another kind of world, one quieter, softer, and a little brighter at the edges. Carlos and I didn't speak much about that night. There were no grand declarations, no sudden changes. But something between us had shifted, something invisible yet real. He stayed in Milan longer than usual that week, saying Rome could wait. I tried to act like it was normal, like his presence at breakfast didn't make my heart beat faster, but it was impossible not to notice the small things, the way he lingered by the kitchen door to talk while I cooked, or how he helped me carry the laundry basket like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sometimes I caught him looking at me quietly, almost as if memorizing me, and I'd look away, smiling to myself like a fool. But even in the happiness, there was a kind of fear, a whisper that asked, how long can this last? One afternoon, we took a drive out of the city. Carlos said he wanted to show me something. The car hummed along the winding road, passing olive groves and golden fields. The air smelled of grass and sunlight. He parked by a hill overlooking a small vineyard. "This," he said, pointing out the window, "was my grandfather's first land." The start of the Bianchi vineyards. I stepped out of the car, the breeze lifting my hair. The view stretched endlessly, rows of vines basking in the late afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," I said softly. He nodded. He used to bring me here when I was a boy. Told me that everything good takes time, wine, love, forgiveness. I smiled. He sounds like a wise man. He was, Carlos said. He also said we don't own the things we love. We just take care of them while we can. I looked at him then, really looked. And I saw not just the confident CEO I'd once imagined, but the grandson, the man who still carried pieces of his family in his heart. Maybe that was why I'd been drawn to him. We were both searching for where we belonged, both carrying ghosts that whispered through our memories. That evening, back at the mansion, we cooked dinner together. I was chopping tomatoes when he suddenly said, "You know, Louisa, I've never done this before." "Cooked?" I teased. He laughed. "That too." But I meant, he paused, setting down the spoon. "Letting someone into this house. Into my life." I looked at him, feeling something stir deep inside. "Maybe it's because it's time," I said softly. "Sometimes, the right people come when we finally stopped looking." He smiled then, a smile so genuine it made me forget everything else. We ate by candlelight, not because it was planned, but because the power flickered off for a few minutes. We didn't mind. The soft glow made everything warmer, closer. "Tell me about your mother," Carlos said. So I did. I told him about Mama's laughter, her strength, the way she could make even a small meal feel like a feast. I told him about her last days and the promise I made to find her father. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. "She must be proud of you," he said. I blinked back tears. "I hope so. I like to think she guided me here." He squeezed my hand gently. "Then thank her for me, for bringing you to my life." Later that night, I sat by the window of my small room, looking at the stars. I thought about how strange life was, how it could take you across oceans to find what you didn't even know you were missing. I thought I had come to Italy to fulfill a promise. But maybe, without realizing it, I was also finding another promise, one whispered by fate itself. A promise of love that wasn't loud, but steady. The kind that grows quietly, like a seed waiting for the right season to bloom. Chapter 14, The Sea That Remembers. The drive to San Remo felt different this time. The first time I had come here, my heart had been full of longing and uncertainty, a daughter searching for the piece of her mother's story that was still missing. Now, sitting beside Carlos, the same road felt softer, warmer, like a familiar melody sung by the wind. The sea appeared on the horizon, a deep, endless blue. I pressed my hand to the window as if I could touch it. Carlos glanced at me. "You really love the sea, don't you?" I smiled. "It reminds me of home, of the Philippines. The sea is where every journey begins, and where it ends." He nodded thoughtfully, one hand steady on the wheel. "Then maybe that's why we're here, to finish a journey properly." We met Mateo at the same small cafe near the beach. He greeted me with a warm hug and the same gentle smile that reminded me of my grandfather's eyes. "Louisa," he said in his quiet, accented English, "you came back." "I promised I would," I replied. He turned to Carlos, shaking his hand. "You must be the man who helped her find us." Carlos smiled humbly. "I only drove the car. Louisa did the rest." Mateo laughed softly. "Then you are both brave." We spent the afternoon at Mateo's home. He had taken out more of my grandfather's old things, photographs, sketches, a few letters carefully folded inside an old leather folder. Each one felt like a heartbeat from the past. There was a picture of my grandfather in front of the vineyard he once tended, another of him with a young woman I immediately recognized as my grandmother Matilda. They were smiling, carefree, and in love, frozen in a happiness they never got to keep. I traced the edge of the photo with my fingertip. "He looks so young." Mateo nodded. He was 24. He loved deeply, but life didn't let him keep what he loved most. His words stayed with me. Chapter 14, The Sea That Remembers. The drive to San Remo felt different this time. The first time I had come here, my heart had been full of longing and uncertainty, a daughter searching for the piece of her mother's story that was still missing. Now, sitting beside Carlos, the same road felt softer, warmer, like a familiar melody sung by the wind. The sea appeared on the horizon, a deep, endless blue. I pressed my hand to the window as if I could touch it. Carlos glanced at me. "You really love the sea, don't you?" I smiled. "It reminds me of home, of the Philippines. The sea is where every journey begins, and where it ends." He nodded thoughtfully, one hand steady on the wheel. "Then maybe that's why we're here, to finish a journey properly." We met Mateo at the same small cafe near the beach. He greeted me with a warm hug and the same gentle smile that reminded me of my grandfather's eyes. "Luisa," he said in his quiet, accented English, "you came back." "I promised I would," I replied. He turned to Carlos, shaking his hand. "You must be the man who helped her find us." Carlos smiled humbly. "I only drove the car. Luisa did the rest." Mateo laughed softly. "Then you are both brave." We spent the afternoon at Mateo's home. He had taken out more of my grandfather's old things, photographs, sketches, a few letters carefully folded inside an old leather folder. Each one felt like a heartbeat from the past. There was a picture of my grandfather in front of the vineyard he once tended, another of him with a young woman I immediately recognized as my grandmother Matilda. They were smiling, carefree, and in love, frozen in a happiness they never got to keep. I traced the edge of the photo with my fingertip. "He looks so young." Mateo nodded. He was 24. He loved deeply, but life didn't let him keep what he loved most. His words stayed with me. That evening, we went to the cemetery again. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky burned gold and rose over the sea. I brought fresh lilies, the same flowers Mama used to love. Kneeling by my grandfather's grave, I whispered, "Lolo, I came back like I promised." Mama couldn't come, but I did. "Thank you for waiting for us, even if it took years." The wind brushed against my cheek like a blessing. I felt Carlos's hand rest gently on my shoulder. "He would be proud of you," he said. "You've carried their love across oceans." Tears filled my eyes, but they didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt cleansing, like the tide washing away old pain. Later, we walked by the shore. The waves were quiet, the air filled with salt and memory. "I understand now," I told Carlos, my voice soft. "Why Mama wanted me to come. It wasn't just to find Lolo. It was to find myself too." He looked at me, the sea reflected in his eyes. "And did you?" I smiled. "Yes." In their love story, I found the courage to begin my own. He reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "Then maybe this is where your mother's story ends, and ours begins." I looked out at the horizon, the meeting place of sea and sky, and for the first time, I felt peace settle inside me like an anchor finding its place. That night, as we drove back to Milan, I fell asleep with my head resting lightly on Carlos's shoulder. He drove quietly, the hum of the engine mixing with the rhythm of my dreams. And in that peaceful in-between of waking and sleeping, I thought of how strange and beautiful life was, how loss could lead us to love, and how love could bring us back to where we were meant to be all along. Chapter 15, Between Two Homes. After our trip to San Remo, everything began to feel different. Not in a loud, sudden way, but quietly, like the shifting of the tide beneath your feet. The mansion felt warmer now, more like a home than ever before. There was laughter in the hallways, the scent of shared meals, and a softness in Carlos's eyes that I had come to know by heart. We fell into a rhythm that felt almost sacred, him working from his study, me tending the garden or the kitchen, both of us finding comfort in each other's nearness. But behind every moment of happiness, a thought lingered, the one I tried not to face. My visa would expire soon. Every day that passed was a grain of sand slipping through my fingers. One morning, while hanging laundry outside, I watched the sunlight spill over the hills. The sheets fluttered like white sails, and the wind carried a faint chill that whispered of endings. I closed my eyes and heard Mama's voice in my memory, "Luisa, promise me you'll find him. And when you do, come home." Home. That word felt heavier now, because I had two of them. The Philippines, where Mama rested, where my roots and my childhood dreams were buried. And Italy, where love had quietly bloomed between letters and unspoken words. That evening, Carlos found me sitting by the piano. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me in silence before asking softly, "You've been quiet lately. Are you thinking of leaving?" I looked down, my hands trembling slightly. "It's not that I want to, but my visa." "I know," he said, walking closer. "I've tried everything I can to extend it. But even if you must go, Louisa, I need you to know something." I lifted my eyes to him, and the emotion there made it hard to breathe. "I'll wait for you," he said. "No matter how long. Because what we have isn't about distance. It's about what's true." I felt tears blur my vision. "Carlos, I don't want to leave you. But I promised Mama I'd come home after finding Lolo. She waited for that peace all her life." He nodded slowly. "Then you should go. Not because you're leaving something behind, but because you're bringing peace with you." The tenderness in his words broke me. He reached out and brushed away a tear that escaped down my cheek. "You came into my life quietly, Louisa, and changed it completely. Wherever you go, this will always be your home." My voice trembled. "And you'll always be my reason to come back." That night, I packed my small suitcase. The same one I had carried from Manila, worn at the corners, but still strong. It felt strange how a single piece of luggage could hold both the beginning and the end of a story. As I folded my clothes, I found the small wooden jewelry box Mateo had given me, my grandmother Matilda's name still etched delicately on the lid. I held it to my chest, whispering, "I did it, Mama. I found him. I found everything. And maybe, I thought, I found love too." When I closed my eyes that night, I dreamt of the sea again, endless, deep, and shimmering under the Italian moonlight. It whispered of return, of promises that didn't end at distance. And for the first time since I arrived in this foreign country, I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because love, real love, doesn't end at goodbye. It waits. It remembers. It grows quietly, even across oceans. Chapter 16, The Goodbye That Stayed. The morning I left felt unreal, like watching a scene from a dream I didn't want to end. The sky was pale blue, the air quiet except for the distant hum of birds waking the day. I had finished packing the night before, but I still walked around the mansion one last time, touching the corners that had become a part of me. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and lemon, Carlos's favorite breakfast combination. The garden was drenched in dew, every leaf shimmering like tears caught in sunlight. This house had once been just a job, a place to earn enough to survive. Now it held pieces of my soul. Carlos met me by the door, his expression calm but his eyes shadowed by something deeper, the kind of sadness that doesn't shout, but lingers quietly. "Are you sure you don't want me to drive you to the airport?" he asked. I shook my head gently. "No. I'd rather remember this house as the place where I arrived, and where you stayed." He managed a small smile. "You always know how to make words sound like poetry." I tried to smile back, but my throat felt tight. He reached into his pocket and handed me a small box, dark blue velvet tied with a gold ribbon. "Carlos," I whispered, hesitant. "Open it when you're home," he said softly. "Not before." I nodded, tucking it safely into my bag. He took my hands in his warm, firm, trembling just slightly. "Louisa, promise me something." "What?" "No matter where you go, don't forget that you have a home here. Not because of the walls or the rooms, but because of the heart that will always wait for you." The tears came before I could stop them. I stepped closer, resting my forehead against his chest. I could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, echoing against mine. "I'll come back," I whispered. "Not because of a promise, but because I want to." He held me then, not possessively, but with the kind of love that lets go because it trusts. When we finally pulled away, I saw something shine in his eyes, not despair, but hope. At the train station, the world felt too loud. The hiss of engines, the murmur of voices, the rolling of luggage, all of it sounded distant, muted beneath the pounding of my heart. Through the window, I saw him standing by his car, watching as the train began to move. I lifted my hand in a small wave, and he did the same. And in that fleeting second before the train turned and the platform disappeared, I saw his lips form the words, "Ti aspetto." "I'll wait for you." The countryside blurred past in a wash of green and gold. I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes, letting the tears fall quietly. I wasn't leaving love behind. I was carrying it with me in the letters we'd written, in the memories we'd made, in the way he looked at me like I was something rare and real. Some loves aren't about holding on tightly. They're about learning to let go and trusting that the heart will find its way home again. When the plane finally touched down in Manila, I opened the small blue box Carlos had given me. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny pendant shaped like a compass. On the back, engraved in small cursive letters, were the words, "For Louisa, wherever your heart leads, it will always find mine." My tears fell freely then, but they weren't of sorrow. They were of gratitude for love, for family, for every path that led me here. That night, in my childhood room, I placed the compass beside my grandmother's wooden jewelry box. Two gifts from two different loves, one from the past, one from the present, both reminding me that love never really leaves. It only changes its address. When we finally pulled away, I saw something shine in his eyes, not despair, but hope. At the train station, the world felt too loud. The hiss of engines, the murmur of voices, the rolling of luggage, all of it sounded distant, muted beneath the pounding of my heart. Through the window, I saw him standing by his car, watching as the train began to move. I lifted my hand in a small wave, and he did the same. And in that fleeting second before the train turned and the platform disappeared, I saw his lips form the words, "Te espero. I'll wait for you." The countryside blurred past in a wash of green and gold. I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes, letting the tears fall quietly. I wasn't leaving love behind. I was carrying it with me in the letters we'd written, in the memories we'd made, in the way he looked at me like I was something rare and real. Some loves aren't about holding on tightly. They're about learning to let go and trusting that the heart will find its way home again. When the plane finally touched down in Manila, I opened the small blue box Carlos had given me. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny pendant shaped like a compass. On the back, engraved in small cursive letters, were the words, "For Louisa, wherever your heart leads, it will always find mine." My tears fell freely then, but they weren't of sorrow. They were of gratitude for love, for family, for every path that led me here. That night, in my childhood room, I placed the compass beside my grandmother's wooden jewelry box. Two gifts from two different loves, one from the past, one from the present, both reminding me that love never really leaves. It only changes its address. He called me every weekend. Sometimes through video, sometimes just a voice call when work kept him busy. The time difference made it tricky, but neither of us seemed to mind. "Ciao, mia Stella," he'd say. "Hello, my star." I'd laugh every time. "Carlos, I'm not a star." "You are," he'd reply softly. "You light up even the distance." Sometimes we talked about simple things, his meetings, Maggie's new job in Florence, the garden at the mansion. Other times, the silence between us said more than words ever could. Even separated by thousands of miles, our hearts somehow remained close, like two songs that shared the same melody, even when played apart. One evening, as I was sorting through old photo albums, I found one of Mama when she was young, smiling on a beach in Batangas, her hair caught by the wind. I placed the photo beside the compass necklace and whispered, "Mama, I found him, and I found someone else too. Someone who makes me feel safe, like you always did." The wind outside shifted, a soft breeze brushing through the open window. And for a fleeting moment, I felt her presence, warm, proud, peaceful. Weeks turned into months. Life continued quietly, yet the thought of Italy never left me. Sometimes at night, I would open Carlos's messages, small paragraphs full of affection and patience. "You once told me that the sea connects every shore," one message said. "So maybe it's the same sea that carries my heart to yours." I held my phone to my chest and smiled through tears. It wasn't the same as being there, but somehow love didn't need distance to stay alive. Because when something is meant for you, no ocean is wide enough to drown it. Chapter 18, The Promise Kept. The days had begun to feel longer. The December air was cooler than usual, carrying the smell of salt from the sea. Christmas lanterns hung outside every window, flickering in colors that reminded me of hope, soft reds, gentle yellows, tiny stars of light. It had been almost 4 months since I left Italy. For months of quiet mornings and long nights. For months of hearing Carlos's voice through a phone speaker instead of across a dinner table. Sometimes he'd call just to say, "Good morning," even if it's midnight where you are. Sometimes he'd fall asleep on video, the camera still open, as if distance itself refused to separate us completely. I missed him more than I wanted to admit out loud. That week, I had been busy helping decorate our small chapel for Christmas Eve. The women from our barangay strung garlands, and I tied ribbons around the pews. "Louisa," my aunt said teasingly, "you look happier these days." "Someone special." I smiled and shook my head. "Just someone far away." She winked knowingly. "Distance doesn't stop love, Anik. It just tests it." Her words lingered with me long after the laughter faded. On the night of December 23rd, the air was full of carols and laughter from the street. I was home, reading one of Carlos's letters for the 100th time. He had sent it 2 weeks earlier. Inside were pictures of the garden, now full of white winter roses, and a short note. "The house feels empty without your laughter. I keep expecting to find one of your letters on the kitchen table. The garden misses you, Louisa." "So do I." I pressed the letter to my heart and whispered, "I miss you too." A knock at the door startled me. It was late, nearly 10 in the evening. I hesitated before opening it. And then my breath caught. There he was. Carlos. Standing right in front of me. The same familiar eyes, the same gentle smile, only now, framed by the warm glow of Christmas lights from the street behind him. For a moment, I couldn't move. It felt like my heart forgot how to beat. "Carlos," I whispered, my voice trembling. He smiled wider, holding out a bouquet of red tulips, the kind that didn't even grow here. "Buonasera, mia Stella." Tears filled my eyes instantly. "You're here." "I told you I'd wait," he said softly. "But I never said I'd stay waiting forever." He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space with warmth that felt like home. I couldn't hold back anymore. I ran to him, and he caught me in his arms. For a long, beautiful moment, the world fell away. There was only the sound of his heartbeat and the feeling of belonging I had missed every day since I left. When we finally pulled apart, he reached into his coat pocket and took out a small velvet box, the same shade of blue as the one he'd given me before. My tears fell again as he opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring with a heart-shaped diamond on it. Elegant and delicate, shining under the yellow porch light. "Louisa," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I crossed oceans to find you again. Not because I couldn't live without you, but because life would never be the same if I didn't share it with you." I covered my mouth, sobbing softly. He took my hand. "You once said love doesn't end at goodbye." You were right. It waited, it grew. So now, I'm asking you, will you let it come home to stay? I nodded, tears spilling down my cheeks. Yes, Carlos. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that small, quiet home, everything I had ever prayed for seemed to come full circle. Outside, fireworks cracked in the distance, announcing the beginning of Christmas Eve. Carlos pulled me close, whispering, "Now I understand what your mother meant about finding family. She didn't just lead you to yours, she led me to mine." I smiled through my tears. "Welcome home, Carlos." And as he kissed me beneath the flicker of Christmas lights, I realized love doesn't belong to one country or one language. It belongs to the hearts brave enough to cross the distance to keep it alive. Chapter 19, 2 Worlds, One Home. The morning after Carlos arrived felt like waking up from a dream I never wanted to end. I half expected to open my eyes and see nothing but sunlight filtering through the curtains, no trace of him, no proof he had come all the way to the Philippines. But when I turned my head, there he was, sitting on the chair by the window, looking completely at peace. "Buongiorno, mia Stella," he said softly. "Good morning," I whispered back, smiling. "You're really here." He nodded, his dark eyes gleaming. "I told you, when I make a promise, I keep it." That morning, I cooked breakfast, longanisa, garlic rice, and fried eggs. He insisted on helping, though he had no idea what he was doing. Wait, I laughed, grabbing the spatula before he burned the eggs. "You're going to start a fire." He grinned sheepishly. Then it means you'll always need to rescue me. We both laughed, and it felt so natural, like this kitchen, this small, humble home, had always been waiting for him to fill it with laughter. Later that day, I brought him to meet my aunt and a few close friends from the chapel. They were all curious about the Italian man who crossed the sea for Louisa. My aunt, of course, wasted no time. So, she said with a teasing smile, "When are you planning to marry our girl?" Carlos almost choked on his halo. Soon, Tia. Very soon, he managed, his cheeks turning red. Everyone laughed, and I wanted to hide under the table. But deep down, hearing him say it made my heart flutter. It wasn't just talk, I could see it in his eyes. He meant it. In the days that followed, we visited nearby beaches, attended Simbang Gabi, and shared quiet moments under the stars. Carlos fell in love with the Philippines almost instantly, the colors, the food, the laughter of people who had little but gave everything. One evening, as we walked by the shore, he took my hand and said, "Your country has a soul, Louisa. It feels alive." I smiled. "And now you're part of it." One afternoon, while helping my aunt prepare food for the Christmas fiesta, Carlos joined us in the kitchen, insisting on learning how to make lumpia. He rolled them carefully, tongue between his teeth, concentrating hard, until one of them unrolled midair and splattered on the table. Everyone burst into laughter. My aunt patted his shoulder affectionately. "You'll fit right in, hijo." And in that moment, I saw it, the blending of two worlds. The Italian man who once lived in a mansion now laughing in a tiny kitchen in the province, surrounded by family he didn't know he needed. On Christmas Eve, after the midnight mass, we walked home beneath the soft glow of parole lanterns. Carlos stopped suddenly, taking both my hands in his. "Louisa," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "I came here thinking I was just visiting. But now I know, this is where I want to begin again. Not in Rome, not in Milan, here with you." Tears welled in my eyes. "Carlos." He took a deep breath and smiled. "I want to marry you here, Louisa. In this chapel. With your family. With your mother's picture beside us. Would that be all right?" I couldn't speak for a moment, only nod, my heart overflowing with joy. That night, while everyone celebrated outside, I sat quietly by the window, holding the ring on my finger. The same girl who once left the Philippines searching for a missing piece of her family had found so much more. A home in the most unexpected places. A love that crossed borders. And a future she never dared to dream. When Carlos joined me, he slipped his arm around my shoulders and whispered, "You found your grandfather's legacy, Louisa. But I think, somewhere along the way, you found ours too." I looked up at him, smiling through my tears. "Yes, Carlos. I think I finally found home." Chapter 20, The Home We Built. The weeks after Christmas felt like a soft, golden dream. Every sunrise brought new laughter, new memories, and new beginnings. Carlos and I began planning our wedding not in some grand cathedral or hotel ballroom, but in our small chapel by the sea. The same chapel where my mother used to pray, where my aunt volunteered, and where the children's voices echoed with songs every Sunday. Carlos wanted it that way. "This is where you found peace," he said. "So, this is where I'll make my promise to you." The entire barangay seemed to come alive with excitement. My aunt led the preparations like a general commanding an army. "Louisa, we'll use the white flowers from the neighbor's garden. Maggie will help with the food." Even Maggie, my ever-loyal friend who started this whole journey by helping me find work in Italy, flew in to be my maid of honor. "You owe me," she teased, hugging me tight. "If not for me, you'd still be scrubbing floors in Milan, not walking down an aisle." We both laughed and cried at the same time. Carlos, meanwhile, was equally determined to add a touch of Italy to the celebration. "I'm bringing espresso and tiramisu," he declared proudly. He called his best friend Marco, who was a chef, to help prepare Italian pastries for the wedding feast. Soon, the air smelled of both pancit and panna cotta, adobo and arancini. Two worlds, one celebration. The night before the wedding, I sat outside under the moonlight, holding the wooden jewelry box Matteo had given me, the one that once belonged to my grandmother, Matilda. Inside, The small pendant with her initials shimmered faintly. "Lola," I whispered, "I found him. I found your Pablo. And I found love, too. I hope you're proud." The wind blew gently, almost like a soft answer. On the morning of our wedding, the chapel was filled with sunlight. White flowers lined the aisle, and children scattered petals ahead of me. I walked slowly, my veil brushing against the wooden floor, the sound of the waves nearby blending with the soft music from the choir. Carlos stood at the altar, dressed in a traditional barong, his Italian charm shining through the Filipino fabric. When our eyes met, the world seemed to stand still. Every step toward him felt like walking through every memory, every hardship, every prayer that led us here. When I reached him, he took my hands and whispered, "You look like a miracle, Luisa." "And you," I said, smiling through my tears, "look like my answer." The priest's voice was gentle, the ceremony simple and pure. We exchanged vows, his spoken in both Italian and English, mine in English and Tagalog. "I promise," I said, "to love you through every distance, through every silence, through every storm." Because love, I've learned, isn't about where you are. It's about who you come home to. Tears glistened in Carlos's eyes. He held my hand tightly. "Ti prometto, amore mio, wherever life takes us, my home will always be with you." When we finally kissed, the chapel erupted in cheers. Outside, the bells rang. Fireworks burst above the sea, their colors reflecting on the water. It was small, imperfect, and absolutely perfect. That night, under a sky full of stars, Carlos and I danced barefoot on the sand. He leaned close and whispered, "You once came to Italy looking for your grandfather. But I think what you really found was your destiny." I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. And I think destiny knew exactly what it was doing. The waves lapped gently against the shore, carrying our laughter into the night. Epilogue. Months later, we moved between two homes, one by the sea in the Philippines and one in Milan. Carlos continued his business, but now he spent more time writing, painting, and helping build a small community center in my hometown. And me? I started teaching English and Tagalog to children of overseas families, those whose parents had gone abroad, like mine once did. Sometimes, when I look out at the horizon, I think of my mother and grandfather. I imagine them watching us, smiling, proud that our story didn't end with loss, it ended with love. Because love, like family, doesn't fade across distance. It waits. It forgives. And if you're brave enough to follow it, it always leads you home. The end.